Great Osobor's $2 million NIL deal is reshaping college sports.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen to the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And Lars, Great Osobor's $2 million NIL deal has been one of the biggest headlines in college sports over the last couple of days, as it is the largest known quantity being paid to any college basketball player. And in a lot of senses, it has certainly reshaped the landscape of just college sports as a whole.
No, you're absolutely right. That's one thing that we kind of knew this era was going to bring. I don't think anybody necessarily expected Greg Osobor to be the poster child, for lack of a better word for it.
Sure, yeah.
But when you think about it, it does make sense in the sense that it's a former player of Danny Sprinkle, so he's not just throwing. This isn't, and we have to be clear about a couple of these things, which we're going to get into. But this isn't just throwing a bag at somebody, that he has no relationship with. We're talking about a player. This is exactly what NIL should be, where a player has earned it, worked up to it, and now is getting paid off in the end for it. Because he's not, Montana State could have never paid him anywhere near seven figures. Utah State maybe could have got close, maybe $500,000, sort of something in that ballpark. But when you talk about a big number like this is the culmination of 3 years of work, not just bag chasing.
I want to just emphasize two things there. One, there is no way that Louisville and Texas Tech, the other two finalists, were not offering similar deals. Would it be publicized like this? Maybe not. But were they offering similar deals? Absolutely. The second thing is, this is not just pay for play. That certainly has been a thing in the world of college sports as long as we know it, but that's not what this is. Just in terms of what we know about Motley Futures and how they have, and this is more than Motley Futures, truly, but just in terms of everything that we know about how Washington has operated in the NIL space since it started. They do so much work with nonprofits. They do so much work with just other groups like that it's so much more than that. And it's, as you said, is all going to somebody who has worked just as hard as he possibly can for the last 3 years to build up to this. So is it, the most a surprising is probably the better way to put it, a surprising outcome that he is this guy? Sure. But does he deserve it? 100%.
Not only that, but if we were to say that, to your point about the public knowledge, what if Bronny James made $3.5–4 million?
Sure.
He actually would be the one that is the poster child for it. And that's such a terrible example because, let's just call a spade a spade. That's because of his last name. This is a great, no pun intended, first name, getting to know a great last name. And that's the situation you want to have, where these players are earning it and they're maximizing on their value. That's what NIL is supposed to be, where players are getting compensated for what their name represents. Greg Osobor at Utah State was the reigning Mountain West Player of the Year. Yep. Led Danny Sprinkle and Utah State to 28 wins and a second-round tournament appearance. First tournament win in 23 years for the program. So when you look at what he did, he more than adequately earned that money. And he's going to have to do the same at Washington, which again is also why the way the deal is structured is worth emphasizing as well. This isn't just getting, like a signing bonus of $2 million to sign with Washington. It's going to come over the course of 3 or 4 different marketing campaigns and events from different companies. So that's going to be over the course of the time of his contract, from when he arrives in June to when he leaves next March. That's when the contract goes through. It's or when that's how the $2 million gets spread out. It doesn't become 2 plus whatever he gets. This is a certain type of structured deal, and it's incentivized to maintain the level of name. That's the thing.
Yeah.
The deal is structured to maintain the level of play, and it's not maintain the level of play, but it's as you continue to play and elevate your name, your money comes with it. That's the important thing to emphasize, because pay for play is just,
here's $2 million, come play for Washington.
Right. And you never think anything else after that. That's not the case here. And I'm honestly going to be intrigued to see what those marketing deals look like. Because, I mean, as I mentioned on the show, I went to the Motley Future event at Green Lake Park with a bunch of over 3 dozen football players during a mile-long walk around Green Lake Park on a Sunday afternoon. These are all little things that you can do. They were doing it to raise in partnership with the American Heart Association.
Yep.
So a great nonprofit working with a great university. That's what it's supposed to be. Putting on some of these companies that are nonprofits, Boys and Girls Club. Imagine Grant Osobor hosts a camp this summer at Washington or in the area, a basketball camp in the Seattle area with the Boys and Girls Club. That's the type of deal you're looking at. You're not saying just come play for us and don't worry about having to do anything. This is exactly what NIL should look like. It's just surprising certain people that maybe weren't necessarily aware of Grant Osobor last season,
Sure.
or don't necessarily understand Washington's NIL structure on Montlake.
I really love every point that you made there. And one thing that I feel that we should make clear, and I know you have a lot to say about this, is we've gotten a lot of comments and questions from everydayers saying, why didn't this money go to a left tackle? Why didn't this money go towards a football team? Because that's not necessarily how this works. And in the world of college sports, and in the world of NIL, it certainly is confusing. It certainly is a lot to take in, and there are a lot of different angles, but this money was certainly earmarked by whoever it was that donated it, by XYZ. We won't get into any specifics. That said, this money, it would be great, pun intended, if it does go to Great Osobor, but this is certainly coming to help improve the basketball team, which is something that any fan is welcome to do, especially the ones that have this kind of money through the Montlake Futures or through whoever else, their NIL collectives, whatever it is that looks like through that school.
Yeah, and the problem with the respect to a left tackle or just offensive tackle slash offensive lineman in general, we both know, and we've said it on the show, that money is there. It's not for a lack of resources that they weren't able to get Marcus Bryant, Branson Hickman, or any of these offensive linemen that they brought in for visits or were looking at. This is other extenuating circumstances within specific recruits that, again, it's a personal fit. And that's actually to the point of pay for play. That's what Washington doesn't do. Because if that were the case, Washington could just say, hey, you know what? We'll triple our offer. We just want you to come play here. And that's not what you should do, and that's not what they're going to do.
So there's one thing, and I don't want to give these people credit because it was very clear that they were uninformed. You sent me a podcast this morning, a well-known national show that was talking about the Great Osobor deal. And they said, I would have expected if Kansas or somebody did that, but not Washington, which is just such a horrendously uninformed take, because we know that Washington can do stuff like this. We know and because we've said it on this show for as long as this show has existed, when Washington is going right, when things are going well, Washington has as many resources as any of these top tier universities in the country. And that's one of the reasons this Great Osobor thing is so important, because, getting an experienced big man with his level of production out of the transfer portal is not something that happens every day. That's why he was rated so highly. That's why he was such a sought-after player. And that's why Washington getting him is such an important thing to do. But it also just kind of shows, for not just basketball, but for football as well, that, hey, the resources are there. Now it's just a matter of coaches in both programs finding a way to fully take advantage of them and finding a way to make sure that it's just utilized to the best of its abilities, because that's what NIL is about. It's about finding ways, as you said, to make sure that you are putting the player in an advantageous situation where, they're going to make some money for their services because college sports make so much money as it is. But on top of that, it's about making sure that it's done the right way. Not here's a whole bunch of money, come play for us. And Lars, that being said, speaking of coaches, Jedd Fisch was rated in an interesting position among the top 25 coaches nationally by a CBS sports writer. And we'll get there right after a message from our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors does everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. So, Lars, you and I were doing some show planning, trying to find some fun things to talk about. One thing that came up was really, really interesting. CBS Sports, they are starting to rank some of the top, coaches around the country, and Brandon Marcello put out his top 30, which has not come out in terms of their consensus rankings yet, but he tweeted out a graphic, which always gets a lot of play, and he put Jedd Fisch as the number 21 coach in the country. Some of the interesting names above him: Jeff Brom at Louisville at number 16, Lance Leipold, who was rumored to be one of Washington's top candidates, and from Kansas at number 15, Chris Kleiman at number 11, Kalen DeBoer at number 9, Chris Kleiman's from Kansas State, and Dan Lanning from Oregon at number 3. Is there any one of those that stands out? Do you think Jedd Fisch might have been, a little higher? Do you think he's just right where he is?
I think the more that I think about that list, Lanning is an intriguing one, but I'll save that for a little bit. Because when you look at when we cover Washington, so we know when we're around the program, but if we take a step back and you look at Jedd Fisch's track, he's only been a head coach at Arizona. Again, was at UCLA in the interim after was it Jim Mora left, or who was the coach that he took over for in the interim? I'm blanking on that. But either way, he had the interim time at UCLA. Other than that, he's been an assistant coach either in the NFL or in college. So he doesn't have necessarily the longevity. He only spent three seasons at Arizona.
3 seasons, yeah.
Did good to go from one win to double-digit wins this past season. But there hasn't been, when you start to look at some of those coaches, you mentioned Kalen DeBoer at 9, has multiple head coaching stops.
Yeah,
with 2+ years. So when you start to look at that list, Chris Kleiman and Lance Leipold both fit that similar mold. They're above him because they kind of got a slight head start in terms of their track for becoming a head coach. But Jedd's in the perfect position to answer your question, to vault up beyond both of them over the next 18 to 24 months with the work that he does at Washington. Where as long as he's in the top 25, it's similar to the AP ranking and the recruiting rankings, where as long as you're recruiting in that 25 role, you can continue to move up. You just can't fall out. And I don't think Jedd Fisch is going to fall out of the top 25, but he certainly is going to ascend over the next couple of years at Washington.
So I like where you're going with that, because I certainly, the first thing I saw when I looked at this list was I think he should be a little higher there. And one of the reasons is the very first thing you said there is the job he did at Arizona, where I think it comes down to so much more than building the program up from a 1-win team to a top 10 team in the country, where it's how he did it. He put a really, really good coaching staff around him, which is always something that's really important. He hired a fantastic strength staff who I just remember watching that game against Arizona and just saying, these guys won't move. This is a really strong, really just deep team that I was really impressed by that aspect of it, which is always such an important thing. You talk about his scheme on the offensive side of the ball is one of the better ones in the country. And it's just all the little things. It's the recruiting where I'm really, really intrigued to see how, this 2025 class plays out, because if he can bring in some of the guys that, at the caliber that he's promised, because obviously he hasn't mentioned any names by NCAA rules, but if he can get some of these top 100 guys, some of these top 200 players, a whole bunch of 4-stars, make this a top 15 class nationally, which all seem to be in his plans. It feels like that weighed kind of heavily in these rankings with some of the guys in the top 5, as I'm sure you'll get to. But the more I look at it, the more I do agree with you, but I think putting him a little bit higher certainly also could have been warranted. But that being said, I do agree that over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, that he's somebody who could be one of the bigger risers on this list if we look back on it for whatever reason in 2027.
No, I agree completely with your point, because it's valid. I think the only thing working against him was just that first season where he won one game in Arizona. And then that you can't really do much about that.
Sure.
But it does help that next couple of years when he was able to get up to, 7 wins and then 10 or 11 wins. So he was able to build it in quick succession. But when you look at like the rebuilding job that Kalen DeBoer did, granted he inherited the massive rush. So some of it is about situations that the coaches came in, and that's why he's able to be in the top 20, top 25, because he didn't inherit a great situation. Actually, he inherited probably a disaster of a situation.
Yeah.
If we're being completely honest, in Arizona. So it wasn't unsurprising that he didn't have immediate success in year one in Arizona. But when you look at the way he built the program, he built it to rise up from 21 to 10 or 21 to 8 or 7 in a couple of years when all these guys, when Damon Williams is a sophomore or a junior, when Adam Muhammad and Jordan Washington are the guys that are the bell cows of the room instead of Jonah Coleman this year. But Jonah Coleman is a product of that first season when you recruit in that whole class with Noah Fafita and Tetero McMillan and all those guys. So it gives credence to Jed can rise up, but I just have a hard time objectively, and this is no slight of Jed. It's just, okay, if we were to put him at, let's say, how high, that's the question I would have for you. How high should he be if he's above 21? Is it 15? Because I don't think he's higher than 15. Like, especially when you look at what some of those guys have done in that top 12, like, okay, they've been there for 4 or 5 years at one or two schools. It's kind of hard to move them out of that spot.
So I certainly agree with you, but I think, top 20 wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. We're sitting just outside. We're not saying he's in a bad spot. It's more just about having the conversation than it is anything else. Where, like, here's one for you. What has Matt Rule really done at the Power 4 level where he's at 19? What has Matt Rule really done at this level, and recently especially, to warrant that ranking? That's the name that I'll bring up, where he certainly did a good job, and that was one of the reasons he got to the NFL, but the recent track record there is not pretty.
That's like having Cliff Kingsbury as like 18 or 17 if you were a college head coach. It doesn't. I understand, and that's actually where we can have the discussion, because it becomes, what is Jedd Fisch's name in comparison to a Lance Leipold, to a Matt Rule. Matt Rule's been in the NFL. He's been on, a number of shows, being able to, and he's also one of those guys where there's a handful of kind of half a dozen to a dozen coaches where you can throw their name out, and the 80% of college football people, whether it's fans, media, who have you, will recognize that name and be able to tell you where he's at, what he did last season, and potentially what he could be looking at this fall. Matt Rule isn't necessarily one of those, but he checks more of those first boxes where, okay, he's with the Panthers. He's now at Nebraska, the Nebraska recognition, which I know Troy Dayton is also there, and all that sort of stuff. So it's that gray window of, okay, yeah, you could easily flip Matt Rule and Jedd Fisch. But if you're talking about moving 2 or 3 spots, it's not that bad. Where certainly, I think if we're having this discussion a year from now, I think Jed's closer to 10 than he is to 20. Meaning, I think I can see him moving up to, between 15 and 12 next season. And then, with a 7, 8, potentially 9-win season next season. And then in 25 and 26, he can start to work his way up into that top 10, which, by the way, if he wins at Washington and follows that Kalen DeBoer track and goes to Florida, that means he won. It doesn't matter at that point where you can, and we can have that discussion later. That's not the point of what I'm making here. But if Jed goes backwards and falls out of the top 25, well, then Washington's in a much different situation, and it doesn't matter at that point, because now you're worried about, okay, well, can you actually build the program here or not? And I think he can.
So you've walked me into a fun point that I feel we can just kind of wrap this up with. I like where you're going with this, and I certainly agree. And this is the biggest reason that I feel like you kind of played into my argument, where that was my whole thing, where I think he should be higher because he's done such a good job being as a team builder, because he's done such a good job with, I don't want to say lesser talent, because he's developed them into just a lot of really, really great players down in Arizona. When you think about Tetero McMillan, you think about Noah Fafita, Jonah Savaiana being another one, Takario Davis. When you think about some of those guys, they were products of Jedd Fisch and his system. He's done such a good job of that, even though, all these current Arizona fans that we see on social media might not want to admit that. But the more you look at that, the more it's, he's done a really good job of developing those guys in a situation that, as you said, was so incredibly unfortunate. And that's one of the reasons I'm excited about the future. I'm excited about what's coming next for this team, is because he's been such a good team builder. Where, yeah, it's a short stint as a head coach. It's 3 seasons, but that still should say something with the program that he inherited and from what he was able to build it into, because that's why he got this job. From recruiting well, from developing well, from putting in a solid scheme. That's what it takes. And now at a school that was just in the national championship, so they can get as high as towards the top of the mountain. This team does have 2 national championships. Yeah, they were a long time ago, but they still have them. So those are all things that are achievable at Washington. It all feels like it could end up really well. And now he just has to continue towards that success. And Lars, with that being said, we're going to have a little bit of fun. We're going to talk about some all-time players that would be a fun addition to the roster. Right after a message from our friends over at Game Time, because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off, which is, it'd be so cool if the Seattle Sonics were around, because there's nothing more that I really want to attend than a Sonics playoff game. Maybe, the Celtics in the NBA Finals, if we're talking basketball, but the Sonics might even top that, because I want to see them come back so bad. And some of the things that make Game Time so cool are their last-minute deals, where you can save up to 60% off buying last minutes for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. You get flash deals. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on and select seats ahead of the game or event, and their all-in pricing, where if you toggle the feature, it shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout, and Game Time tickets coverage, where your purchase is covered with most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. You can take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Okay, Lars, we've got a really fun segment here. Where this was one of the fun ideas, where we're going to be doing a lot of this kind of stuff in the off season. So I really hope the everydayers enjoy it. If you have any of those kind of fun questions for us that you want to see answer like this, just drop them down right here in the YouTube comments, and we'll try to get back to as many of them as we possibly can. So we're going to caveat this. All-time players that you want to add to Washington's 2024 roster, one of them has to be from last season's team, and one of them cannot be from last season's team. Lars, you have the floor.
All right. So just in the spirit of transparency, I'm going to start with not transparency, efficiency. I'm going to start with last year's team, and I'm going to say Roger Rosengarten, because one thing, and that'll just solve everybody's happiness already. Because imagine if you could have Roger Rosengarten return and play left tackle, and that's the caveat as well, where he would, because you had Drew Azzopardi on the right side, Drew could still stay on the right side and just kick Roger over to left, and Roger gets to have 1 year in the Big Ten. But I would also be curious to see what that would have looked like with Brennan Carroll, because we know how good of an offensive line coach Scott Huff was. But I'm just curious. I'm just kind of curious and intrigued by what Roger could have looked like at left tackle in Brennan Carroll's scheme, knowing what he already did in Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer's scheme over the past couple of seasons. And had he not had that 2020-21, snafu of COVID and coming in when he did, he probably wouldn't even have come back last season, but except for the national championship. So it wasn't surprising that he decided not to come back for one final year. But I also just kind of still wonder what would it have been like, because that would solve a whole lot of problems right now.
Absolutely. So in the spirit of the offensive line, because it kind of is the chalk answer, I'm going to go with Troy Fautanu, where I wanted to be like, maybe I'll go with Roma Dunze just to make the offense way more fun, or bring back Michael Penix for a final season, and just something like that, where just to make it different. But Troy Fautanu is the answer, where obviously we know how good he was. He just was the number 20 overall pick in the draft, selected by the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think if he comes back for one more season and continues to show everything, where obviously we know he's going to test well at the NFL Combine, just thinking his draft process goes the same way that it does, I think if this wasn't such a good offensive line class, that he could have been the first tackle off the board. I really truly believe that, with one more season under his belt. Where did he need it? No. I want to make all that very clear. No, he didn't need any of that. But it just would have been such a big help to this team where there's still so many questions along the offensive line. And if you have two nice tackles in Drew Azapardi and Troy Fautano, it makes the interior a little bit easier to fill out, where you can rely on D'Angelo Tutiali at center, guard Lars slides back in at left guard. I think he's going to have a solid season. And then all of a sudden you really only have one spot to worry about. You don't have to, we're not sitting in this position saying, oh, I wonder, what left tackle they're going to get out of the transfer portal, because it just makes that a lot easier. And, if you go with Enoch Mahai at right guard, that's nice. If there's somebody else who impresses you during fall camp, that's nice. Whoever it ends up being, you feel a lot better about the situation along the offensive line. I know that's all really obvious. I just said a whole lot of things to say what we already know, but it's all about having fun. Lars, with that being said, non-2023 UW roster, who are you going with?
So now this is the fun one because there's so many more guys to pick from, and
there are.
You could, and if you think about it, there's different. The other thing to consider as we make our final picks for this is what positions do they actually need? Where are some guys, because they don't need a quarterback. So you don't need to go back to Jake Browning or things like that. No offense to Jake, right? But I think when you look at certain positions, most of them don't need it.
So I'm sorry to cut you off. I do want to just add one quick caveat in here. I know he's gotten a lot of love on the show over the past couple of weeks. Keith Price in this offense would be a lot of fun. I just want to throw that out there because of the way Jedd Fisch loves his mobile quarterbacks. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, and that's your perfect example, because I would love to see that in this offense. But if I could pick one guy to put on this team with this defensive coaching staff,
all right, we're
it's
already
Vita Vea. It's Vita Vea. Yeah.
Come on, man.
Yeah.
Come on, man. That's my favorite Husky of all time. Come on now.
Okay. Or you know what? I could take the other one that I saw.
No, take it. Okay. I have a backup answer.
Okay, because I was gonna say that the Vito in this scheme. Man, like the possibilities are endless with what Vita could do with Steve Belichick and Jason Kafusi, and that's no slight to what he was able to do under Pete Kwiatkowski. So it's not. There's no slight of it. It's actually why I would pick him, right? It's why you would bring him back, because some people might say Steve Edmond, this and that. I was born in 1994, so I'm just going to speak on what I know. No disrespect to Edmond or anybody from the past. But it would be disingenuous of me to say, oh, I would pick Edmond. This is what I read about him. It's like, no, what I saw at practice from Vita, where he would just actually suplex offensive linemen, I'm more intrigued by what I saw there.
Absolutely. And so that's a fun thing where for all the everydayers out there, we want to know who you would pick with the caveats, without the caveats, because if you're somebody who, obviously is older than us and you enjoyed the Steve Edmond days, like Lincoln Kennedy was somebody that I was considering going with here to stick with the offensive line theme. But again, somebody I didn't watch. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Lars. If that's somebody you want to just throw them down in the comments, we want to hear all your answers. But with that being said, I did hint at that I was going to go defense, and Vita Vea was, and still truly will always be my favorite Husky of all time. Like watching him is just one of the biggest traits, and just comes to watching film. I'm going to go with another member of the 2016 Death Row defense. No, I'm not going with Budda Baker. I'm giving that spot to Sidney Jones. Sidney Jones is another one of just my favorite Huskies of all time. Getting him across from Ephesians Prysock would feed families. To quote just the just what's going on, it would feed families, Lars. Imagine that secondary under the guys of John Richardson and Steve Belichick. I would have so much fun watching that week in and week out, because we know how much fun Sidney Jones was to watch in press coverage. Him and Ephesians Prysock would form the best cornerback tandem this school has ever seen. Yes, I said it. That would, I can't say enough good things about it, because he'd be such a good fit for this defense. And he's always just going to be one of the great unknowns for me, because if his, pro day didn't go the way that it did, he didn't suffer the Achilles injury. This is somebody who we were probably talking about as a top 15 pick, and his pro career probably turns out way differently than it does. But man, watching him at Washington is just one of the great joys of just that era of Husky football.
That's a good. I'm going to give an honorable mention, because, and maybe you can give one as well.
I have one.
In that same vein, I was thinking Shaq Thompson, because that versatile hybrid safety linebacker role that he could play in this defense. And then now it's worth having to kind of have a flashback to what was Shaq like in high school, because that's what they'd be adding, right? You're talking about college Shaq. You're talking about that, not what he's done in the NFL, which is still have a great career with the Carolina Panthers. But with that being said, that was a different level of Shaq. Like that Shaq, college Shaq was just relentless, and I couldn't imagine if you gave Steve Belichick a versatile 6'3", 215, 225-pound Shaq Thompson and said, "What can you do with this guy for 3 years?" I would love to see that. So
here's my honorable mention for you. So one position that we've talked a lot about over the course of just the offseason, even though, it sometimes goes unnoticed because it's not necessarily always utilized very well, is tight end. Give me Austin Seferian-Jenkins in this passing attack. Wouldn't that be so much fun? Thank you. I would love watching that so much with Denzel Boston, Jeremiah Hunter, Giles Jackson, and Austin Seferian-Jenkins. It just adds such a fun layer to this offense where, they've run a lot of these just short concepts. We're watching him just grab a little 5-yard crossing route from Will Rogers and turn it up the field. That would be so much fun. Watching him on all the corner routes that he ran over at his time at UW, where it always just seemed like he was just the best athlete on the field because he was for so often. Oh man, that would be so much fun. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your constant support. Like I said, if there's anything about this episode, you got any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, drop them right down below in the comments. Try to get back to as many of you as possibly can. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, and be sure to like, comment, subscribe, do all that sort of stuff, because we are wherever you get your podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere, updating the channel with new content every single day. We got so much more fun stuff coming through for you throughout the off season. So make sure you subscribe, like the video, leave us a comment down below for your audio only. Please leave us a 5-star review, as it all really does help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.